The morning I found out, I made myself a cup of tea. Not because I was calm. Not because I didn't feel it. But because my hands needed something to do while my mind made a decision that would change the next 3 years of my life. It was a Tuesday. 6:47 a.m. The kind of quiet morning where the ceiling fan hums just loud enough to fill the silence, and the light comes through the kitchen window at that low, pale angle that makes everything look gentler than it is. I had found the messages the night before. I hadn't gone looking. The phone had buzzed on the counter while Raheel was in the shower, and the preview, just those first 12 words, was enough. 12 words from Sarah, my best friend of 11 years. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. I set the phone face down exactly where I found it, and I went to bed. Not to sleep. To think. By 6:45 the next morning, I had already made 3 decisions. The first, I would not scream. The second, I would not beg. The third, and this is the one that would matter most, I picked up my own phone, opened a contact I hadn't called in 4 months, and typed exactly 3 words. It's time now. My uncle read it within 2 minutes. He didn't call back. He didn't ask questions. He simply replied with 1 word. Understood. That was the last calm moment before everything began to unravel. But not for me. For them. I finished my tea. I rinsed the cup. I placed Raheel's house key on the kitchen table. His grandmother's table, the one he had always been so proud of, and I walked out the front door with 1 bag and a folder I had been quietly building for 2 years. My name is Nadia. I was 34 years old when my marriage ended, and 34 years old when my actual life began. I had spent the previous 7 years being what everyone around me needed me to be. Good wife. A quiet daughter-in-law. Reliable friend. The one who remembered birthdays, organized dinners, smoothed over arguments at family gatherings with a smile and a redirect. Professionally, I was a compliance officer at a mid-sized trading firm in Karachi. My job, the actual technical function of my job, was to read financial documents, flag irregularities, trace transaction patterns, and identify when numbers didn't match the story being told. I was very good at it. I had a master's degree in financial management from IBA. I had 7 years of professional experience. I had sat across the table from auditors, lawyers, and government inspectors and calmly walked them through documentation that other people found overwhelming. And yet, somehow, inside my own home, I had spent years being treated like I didn't understand anything important. Raheel ran his own import-export company. Mid-size. Decent revenue on paper. He had started it 3 years before we married, and for the first 2 years of our marriage, I had genuinely tried to support it, reviewing contracts when he asked, flagging supplier inconsistencies, helping him restructure his billing systems. Then one evening over dinner he told me, and I remember this very specifically, Nadia, business is not really your area. Just focus on the house. He nodded. I didn't argue, but I kept reading. Let me be honest with you about something most people won't admit in a story like this. I did not marry a monster. I married a man who was charming at restaurants, generous at family events, and perfectly capable of making me feel, on certain evenings, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That is the part that takes the longest to process. Not the betrayal itself, but the architecture of the life you built around someone who was, quietly and consistently, showing you who they really were. You just weren't ready to look directly at it yet. Raheel and I had met through a mutual connection at a wedding in Lahore. He was sharp, well-dressed, and funny in that specific way that makes a room feel warmer. We dated for 8 months. He proposed at his family's farmhouse in Bedian Road. Simple, no grand gesture, just him and me and a ring his mother had picked. I said yes because it felt real. 'Cause he felt real. We got married in November 7 years ago. The wedding cost his family approximately 28 rupees lakh. My family contributed 14 rupees lakh. I remember those numbers because I was the one who tracked the budget in a shared Google sheet. Color-coded, categorized, updated every 3 days. Raheel never once opened that sheet. That should have told me something. The first year was fine. Genuinely fine. We lived in a rented apartment in DHA Phase 6. 65,000 rupees a month, while Rahil's business was growing and I was still working full-time. I paid half the rent from my own salary every single month. We had an informal agreement. It was never written down. He said we didn't need to write things down because we're family, Nadia, not business partners. Accepted that. I shouldn't have. By year 2, small things began shifting. He started having dinners with suppliers that I wasn't invited to. Not unusual for business. But then there were weekend trips. Murray, Islamabad, once Lahore, where he'd come back distracted and slightly irritable, as though returning home was an interruption rather than a destination. I asked once carefully if everything was all right. He said, "You worry too much. That's your problem. You always want to analyze everything." I let it go. By year 3, Sarah had entered our lives as a couple. She had been my friend since university. 11 years of shared history, borrowed clothes, midnight phone calls, the kind of friendship that feels so permanent you stop questioning it. She was warm, funny, and socially effortless in ways I have never been. I introduced her to Rahil at a dinner party at our house in March, 4 years into our marriage. I remember she wore a mustard yellow kurta that evening. I remember because I had complimented it when she arrived. She had laughed and said, "You always notice everything, Nadia." She was right. Do. I just didn't notice the right things fast enough. Within 6 months, Sarah was a fixture in our social circle. She came to family dinners. She came to Rahil's office launch party when he moved to a new space in Clifton. She sat next to his mother at Eid and made her laugh with stories I had never heard before. His mother adored her. His mother, who had spent 3 years of our marriage finding quiet, precise ways to remind me that I was perhaps too career-focused and not flexible enough for a happy home. That same woman would light up when Sarah walked into a room. Noticed. Filed it away. By year 5, the financial irregularities in Rahil's business had become impossible to ignore, at least for someone with my training. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious in the way a jealous spouse is suspicious. I was simply paying attention the way a compliance officer pays attention because patterns have a texture, and when that texture changes, something in your professional instinct responds before your personal instinct catches up. The first thing I noticed was a supplier invoice. A single page left on his desk, visible from where I was standing, that listed a consignment value of 4.2 million rupees. But I had seen the corresponding bank transfer 3 days earlier accidentally, when he'd asked me to check something on his laptop. That transfer was 6.8 million rupees. A 2.6 million rupees discrepancy. On one invoice. I didn't say anything. I took a photograph of the invoice with my phone. Quietly. Methodically. That photograph became the first item in a folder I labeled simply Reference. Over the next 22 months, that folder grew to 47 documents. Forged supplier agreements. Duplicate invoices with altered figures. 3 shell company registrations. I found them through this SCP database. All 3 registered at addresses that didn't exist. 11 cash transactions, each just under the 500,000 rupees threshold that would trigger automatic reporting, which told me he knew exactly what he was doing and exactly how to stay just beneath it. He had been using the company not just to earn, but to move money in ways that no licensed import-export operation is legally permitted to move money. And I had documented all of it. Not because I planned to use it. Not yet. But because I was trained to document. Because irregularities make me uncomfortable. Because somewhere, beneath the wife who nodded and let things go, there was still the compliance officer who knew that paper trails don't lie. Even when the people creating them do. I want to be clear about something before I continue. I was not a perfect wife. I was not always warm. I worked long hours. I sometimes came home with my mind still at the office, still running numbers, still half present. There were evenings I chose a report over a conversation. There were arguments I ended too quickly because I was too tired to untangle them properly. I am not telling you I was perfect. I am telling you I was faithful. I was present in the ways that mattered. Paid half of everything. I supported a business that was secretly being built on fraud. And I kept a friend close, a friend who had been slowly, deliberately moving toward the center of my marriage. That was the life I was living. And I hadn't yet seen it clearly. It was a Saturday evening in September. We had plans, Raheel and I, to attend a dinner at a colleague's house in Gulshan. I had confirmed with him that morning. He had nodded, said of course, and gone back to his phone. By 7 p.m., he still hadn't changed. I was dressed, ready, keys in my hand. I asked him if we were leaving. He said, "Actually, I have to go to the office. There's an issue with a shipment clearance. I'll be back by 10. He nodded. Said fine. I didn't go to the dinner either. I sat in our living room for 45 minutes, in my good clothes, with nowhere to go, feeling something I couldn't immediately name. Not suspicion. Something older and quieter than suspicion. The feeling of a pattern completing itself. At 8:15 my phone rang. It was Hina, a mutual friend, calling to ask why I hadn't come to the dinner. I told her Raheel had an emergency at the office. There was a pause on the line. Pause just slightly too long. Then she said, "Oh, I thought I saw his car outside Sarah's building when I was passing through Clifton earlier. Maybe I was mistaken." She said it carefully. The way you say something when you already know it isn't a mistake. Thanked her. Hung up. I sat with that information for exactly 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall, and then I called Sarah. She didn't answer. Called again. She didn't answer. I texted, "Hey, are you home? Raheel's stuck at work, wanted to see if you wanted company." The message delivered. 2 blue ticks appeared immediately. She had read it. She did not reply for 1 hour and 40 minutes. When she finally did, she wrote, "Sorry, was asleep. Let's catch up this week." 2 blue ticks at 8:22 p.m. Sleep. Put the phone down. I did not go to Sarah's building that night. I did not call Raheel back. I did not do anything that could be described as dramatic or reactive. Instead, I went to the bedroom, opened my laptop, and added a new entry to my reference folder. Not a financial document this time. A dated, time-stamped personal note. Time of conversation with Hina. Exact words spoken. Sarah's message timestamps. Raheel's stated reason for absence. Documentation is documentation. He came home at 11:40 p.m. He smelled of a restaurant, not an office. Food and air conditioning and something that wasn't a shipment emergency. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and no expression on my face. He looked at me. Something moved behind his eyes, just briefly. He said, "Everything okay?" I said, "Yes. How was the office?" He said, "Sorted it out. Long evening." He nodded. I said, "Okay. I'm going to sleep." I went to the bedroom. I lay in the dark. And I made the decision I told you about at the beginning of this story. The 3 decisions made quietly, in the space between one breath and the next. No screaming. No begging. And then, the messages. Because I hadn't gone looking that night. But the next morning, when he left his phone on the counter and went to shower, it buzzed. The preview loaded on the screen. Sarah's name. And the first 12 words of a message I didn't need to open to understand. I won't read you those 12 words. Not because they were particularly shocking, they weren't, in the end. Betrayal, when it finally shows its face, rarely is. It's smaller than you expected. More ordinary. More human, and therefore more disappointing than any dramatic version you'd imagined. I won't read them because they don't matter anymore. What matters is what I did next. 3 days later, I called my sister and asked her to come over on Wednesday morning. I told her I needed help with something. She didn't ask what. She just said, "I'll be there." I called my uncle that same evening. The IBA man, the one with 30 years in federal service, the one who had always called me my sharp one, since I was 8 years old sitting at his dining table doing long division while the other cousins watched television. I didn't explain everything. I just said, "Uncle, I'm going to need your guidance on something. Professionally. Not personally." He said, "Come to me when you're ready." 2 weeks later I was ready. And the morning I walked out of that house, key on the table, one bag over my shoulder, folder in my hand, I sent him those 3 words. "It's time now. Let me tell you about the folder." Not the physical one, though there was a physical one. A plain navy blue file organizer I had bought from a stationery shop in Tarak Road for 180 rupees, the kind students use for university assignments. Unremarkable. Intentionally so. I mean the digital one. It lived in an encrypted cloud drive under a name that would mean nothing to anyone who stumbled across it. Not evidence or Raheel documents, or anything that carried weight. I had named it after a recipe. A specific biryani recipe my grandmother used to make, a name so personal and so random that no one in the world would have searched for it. 47 items. Organized by date, category, and relevance. Backed up in 3 places. The cloud drive, an external hard drive that lived at my sister's house inside a shoebox, and a trusted email address I had created specifically for this purpose and accessed only from a private browser on my office laptop during lunch breaks. I had been building it for 22 months. Not out of malice. Not because I had planned this ending. But because I am, by training and by instinct, someone who does not let irregularities go undocumented. And what I had found in Raheel's business, slowly, accidentally, and then with increasing clarity, was not a small irregularity. It was a pattern. Deliberate, sustained, and legally catastrophic. Let me walk you through what was actually in that folder because I want you to understand the weight of it. The first layer was the invoice discrepancies. 11 of them spanning 18 months. Each one showed a gap between the declared transaction value, the number that appeared on official paperwork submitted to customs and tax authorities, and the actual amount transferred through the company's bank accounts. The gaps ranged from 800,000 rupees on the smaller end to 3.4 million rupees on the largest single instance. In total, across those 11 invoices, the undeclared difference was approximately 19.2 million rupees. That is not a rounding error. That is not a bookkeeping mistake. That is a systematic pattern of underdeclaration, which, under Pakistani customs and taxation law, constitutes fraud. Specifically, the kind of fraud that falls under the jurisdiction of the Federal Board of Revenue and, depending on the amounts and intent, the Federal Investigation Agency. I knew this because it was, quite literally, my job to know this. The second layer was the shell companies. I had found the first one by accident. A supplier name that appeared on 3 of Raheel's invoices but returned no results in any business directory, no registration on the SECP portal, and a listed address in Faisalabad that, when I searched it on Google Maps, turned out to be a vacant plot next to a petrol station. Company with no office, no registration, no verifiable existence, but with 7.6 million rupees in payments flowing toward it across 8 months. I searched deeper. I found 2 more. Different names, different cities, same pattern. Addresses that didn't hold up, registration numbers that either didn't exist or belonged to entirely unrelated businesses, and combined inflows from Raheel's company accounts totaling 14.3 million rupees over 14 months. 3 ghost companies. 14.3 million rupees in payments to entities that did not functionally exist. In my folder, I had a separate tab for each one. Screenshots of the SECP portal showing the failed searches, Google Maps images of the listed addresses, printouts of the bank transfer records I had photographed, and a 1-page summary I had written myself explaining the connection between each shell entity and the corresponding invoice on Raheel's books. I had written that summary the way I would have written a compliance report at work. Clean. Numbered. First. The kind of document that doesn't require explanation because it explains itself. The third layer, and this is the one that elevated everything from financial irregularity to something more serious, was the cash transaction pattern. 11 separate cash withdrawals from the company account over 9 months. Each one between 480,000 rupees and 499,000 rupees. Never once crossing Rs. 500,000. If you don't know why that number matters, 500,000 rupees is the threshold above which cash transactions in Pakistani business accounts are required to be flagged and reported to the relevant financial monitoring authority. It is a compliance threshold that every registered business owner is legally expected to know. Raheel knew it. I was certain of that because he had, 2 years earlier, asked me to review his company's compliance obligations when he was renewing his import-export license. I had explained the threshold to him myself. I had even sent him a summary email, which I still had time-stamped in my personal inbox, outlining the reporting requirements. He had taken that knowledge and used it to stay precisely, deliberately beneath the line. 11 times. That email, the one where I had explained the very rule he was systematically exploiting, was item number 43 in my folder. I had kept it not because I thought I would ever need it. I had kept it because I keep everything. Now, and this is the part one need you to understand about my state of mind during all of this, I had not assembled this folder as a weapon. I want to be honest about that. For most of the 22 months I was building it, I genuinely believed I was documenting irregularities that I would eventually convince Raheel to correct. I had told myself a version of the story where I would sit down with him one evening, show him the file calmly, explain the legal exposure he had created, and he would, because I believed he was ultimately a rational person, agree to rectify it. I had rehearsed that conversation in my head probably 40 times. I never had it. Because every time I prepared myself to have it, something in the dynamic of our home reminded me that Raheel did not receive information from me as information. He received it as interference, as overreach, as me not knowing my place. Business is not really your area, Nadia. So I kept the folder. And I kept adding to it. And I waited. Not for betrayal, not for the marriage to end, but for a moment of clarity that never came from him. It came from Sarah's phone screen instead. By the time I walked out of that house with my navy blue file organizer and my encrypted drive, the folder was not a weapon I had built in anger. It was a record I had built in precision. And precision, in the right hands, is the most powerful thing in the world. What I did next was not impulsive. It was not emotional. It was the most methodical 72 hours of my entire professional life. And I have had some very methodical days. I went to my sister's house. I slept for 11 hours. I woke up, made tea, and sat at her kitchen table with my laptop and my folder and a notepad. And I began to build the case why Uncle's name is Tariq Mahmood. He is 61 years old. He has worked in federal government service for 31 years, the last 14 of which were spent in a division that, among other responsibilities, coordinates between the Federal Board of Revenue and the Federal Investigation Agency on matters involving commercial fraud and financial crimes. He is a quiet man. He speaks slowly and precisely, the way people do when they have spent decades understanding that words, once released, cannot be retrieved. He has never once raised his voice at a family gathering. He has also, over the course of his career, been involved in the investigation and prosecution of 17 commercial fraud cases resulting in conviction. He is not a man you text lightly. He is also the man who had called me my sharp one since I was 8 years old. When he received my 3 words that Tuesday morning, he understood them completely. Not because I had briefed him on Raheel's financial records. I hadn't, not yet. But because 3 months earlier, during Eid dinner at my parents' house, I had sat next to him for 2 hours and, in the careful oblique way that people in complicated situations sometimes speak to trusted family members, I had described, in general hypothetical terms, the profile of a business compliance situation I had encountered professionally. I had described the invoice discrepancies, the shell companies, the cash threshold pattern. He had listened without interrupting. At the end, he had looked at me over his chai cup and said very quietly, "If this situation ever becomes personal rather than professional, I hope the person involved has kept proper documentation." I had said, "They have." He had nodded once. And we had moved on to other topics. That conversation was the most important one I had in the 6 months before the marriage ended. Because it told me that when I was ready, I would not be walking into an unfamiliar institution with a folder full of documents and no context. I would be walking in with my uncle, a man who knew the system, knew the people, and knew exactly which door to knock on. The 72 hours after I left the house looked, from the outside, like nothing. I did not post anything on social media. I did not call mutual friends. I did not send Raheel a dramatic message explaining my departure. I left him a single handwritten note on the kitchen table, next to his house key, that said, "I've moved out. I'll be in touch through a lawyer regarding the next steps. Please don't contact me directly." 8 words of instruction. No emotion. No accusation. He called 4 times that day. I didn't answer. I texted once simply, "Please communicate through the lawyer." And I put my phone face down and went back to my notepad. On day 2, I met with my uncle at his home in the afternoon. I brought the folder, both the physical organizer and the laptop with the encrypted drive. I sat across from him at his study table, the same table where I had done long division as a child, and I walked him through everything. Every invoice, every shell company, every cash withdrawal, the summary documents I had prepared, the email where I had explained the reporting threshold that Raheel later exploited. He read everything without speaking. Took 1 hour and 20 minutes. When he finished, he removed his reading glasses, set them on the table and said, "Nadia, this is not a civil matter. This is criminal. You understand that?" I said, "Yes." He said, "And you're comfortable with where this goes?" I said, "He made his choices. I'm making mine." My uncle nodded. He picked up his phone. He made 2 calls. I don't know to whom and I didn't ask. Both calls lasted under 3 minutes. Both were conducted in a tone so ordinary they could have been about anything. When he put the phone down, he looked at me and said, "You'll need to provide a formal written complaint. I'll tell you exactly how to structure it. Copy goes to FBR. Copy goes to the relevant FIA desk. Your documentation will be treated as supporting evidence." He paused. Then he said, "It would help if you had a good lawyer." I said, "I have an appointment tomorrow morning." The lawyer's name was Farrokh Siddiqui. He came recommended by a colleague from my office, a woman who had handled a business dispute the previous year, and described him as the kind of lawyer who reads every page and charges you accordingly, but never loses a detail. His office was on the 4th floor of a building in Clifton. Small, precise, full of files. He looked like a man who had heard many stories and was not easily surprised by any of them. I sat down. I placed the folder on his desk. I said, "I'm filing for divorce. My husband has been conducting financial fraud through his import-export business for at least 2 years. I have documentation. I also have a senior government contact who is facilitating the formal complaint process. I want to know what my legal position is, specifically regarding marital assets, and specifically regarding my decision not to claim the house or the joint accounts." He looked at me for a moment. Then he opened the folder. 40 minutes later he closed it, looked up and said, "And I remember this precisely because it was the first time in years someone had looked at me with that particular expression, the one that means you are more capable than anyone in your life has given you credit for." He said, "Do you realize what you're giving up? The house, the property, the accounts. All of this is legally yours. You have grounds. You have documentation. You could claim significantly more than most people walk away with." I looked at him. I said, "I know exactly what I'm giving up. I'm taking something worth more than all of it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "All right, let's get to work." Over the next 11 days, 3 things happened in sequence, each one timed, each one deliberate, each one invisible to Raheel and Sarah. The formal written complaint, structured exactly as my uncle had specified, sourced entirely from my documented evidence, was submitted to the FBR and the FIA simultaneously on day 4. My divorce filing was submitted to the family court on day 7, citing irreconcilable differences. No mention of Sarah. No mention of the fraud. Clean, procedural, and impossible to contest without raising questions Raheel could not afford to answer publicly. And on day 11, after Farrokh had reviewed everything and confirmed that my documentation was both legally admissible and extraordinarily comprehensive, I did one last thing. I registered an NGO. The name I had chosen was one I had been carrying in my head for almost a year before any of this happened. A name that had nothing to do with Raheel, or Sarah, or fraud, or revenge. It was the name of something I had wanted to build for a long time and had kept setting aside because the life I was living didn't leave room for it. Now it did. The registration went through in 9 days. The office space, a small 2-room unit in a shared co-working building in Gulberg, Lahore, where I had decided to relocate, cost 22,000 rupees a month. A local woman who had been following my work history through LinkedIn reached out within a week of the registration going public and offered to volunteer. She was the first of 7. I did not tell Raheel any of this was coming. I did not warn Sarah. I did not send a message. I did not make a speech. I did not post a cryptic caption. I did not give either of them the dignity of anticipating what was about to arrive at their door. I simply waited. The way you wait when you know the outcome is already decided and the only variable left is timing. The first thing that happened was the letter. Raheel received it on a Thursday morning. I know this because my uncle's contact confirmed the delivery date, and because Raheel called my number 4 times between 9:47 a.m. and 10:15 a.m. that day. I did not answer. I forwarded the call log screenshot to Farrick with a single message. Please note the contact attempts. Farrick noted them. The letter was an official notice from the Federal Board of Revenue, a formal inquiry into the financial records of Raheel's import-export company, specifically requesting documentation for 11 flagged transactions across an 18-month period. It was not an arrest. It was not a raid. It was a letter. But anyone who has ever received a letter like that, anyone who knows what it means when the FBR sends a formal inquiry notice to a registered business, understands that it is not the beginning of a conversation. It is the beginning of an ending. Raheel's accountant, I later learned through a mutual professional contact, advised him immediately to engage a lawyer. He engaged 2. Their combined retainer cost him 340,000 rupees up front. That was week 1. Week 2 moved faster. The FIA, working in parallel with the FBR inquiry and drawing on the same documentation package my uncle had helped route through the correct channels, opened a preliminary investigation into the 3 shell company registrations. Shell companies, when they exist solely to receive payments from a single source with no verifiable business activity, fall under a specific and serious category of financial crime in Pakistani law. The preliminary investigation triggered an automatic freeze on Raheel's primary business account. Not his personal account, not yet, but the company account through which all 11 flagged transactions had passed us. 2.3 million frozen. Pending review. His import-export license. The license he had built his entire professional identity around. The license he had renewed twice during our marriage and spoken about with a specific pride of a man who considers himself self-made, was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. No license. No operating account. No ability to clear shipments, process supplier payments, or conduct any of the international trade his business depended on. In practical terms, his company stopped functioning on a Tuesday afternoon in October, approximately 19 days after I had placed his house key on his grandmother's kitchen table and walked out the front door. I want to tell you about the 23rd day specifically, because on day 23 Sarah called me. Not Raheel. Sarah. I stared at her name on my screen for a long moment. Then I answered. She didn't say hello. She said, "Nadia, what did you do?" Her voice was not angry. It was something smaller than angry. Something closer to frightened. I said, "I documented what was true, Sarah. I've been doing that for a long time." She said, "His business is finished. Do you understand that? Everything is frozen. We can't." She stopped herself there. She had said we and then caught it but not fast enough. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said very quietly, "I hope you find your way through it. I genuinely do." And I ended the call. That was the last time Sarah and I spoke. The love story she had chosen, the one built on 11 years of my friendship, on borrowed access to my home and my family and my social circle, on Tuesday evenings that Raheel had described as office emergencies. That story lasted exactly 23 days before the weight of its consequences made it something neither of them had signed up for. Raheel was, as of 6 weeks after my departure, the prime accused in a federal financial fraud investigation. His lawyers were managing a process that would take months, possibly longer, to resolve. His company was non-operational. His reputation in the business community, the community where he had spent years cultivating the image of a sharp, independent entrepreneur, was quietly, efficiently, and permanently altered. I did not celebrate. I did not post about it. I did not call anyone to report the news. I was by that point in Lahore. setting up my office, interviewing volunteers, writing the mission statement for an organization I had been wanting to build for years and had finally given myself permission to build. The newspaper story came 6 weeks after I had relocated. A journalist from a local Lahore publication, a woman who covered social entrepreneurship and women-led initiatives, had found the NGO registration through a public database and reached out for an interview. I agreed, with the condition that certain personal details remain general. The headline, when it ran, read, "Betrayed wife walks away from everything and builds something bigger." I read it at my desk on a Wednesday morning with a cup of tea. I felt, and I want to find the right word for this because proud isn't quite it and vindicated isn't quite it either. I felt correct. Like a calculation that had finally resolved. Like a document that had been pending for a long time and had finally been filed. That is the closest I can get to describing it. Within 3 weeks of the article running, I had received messages from 41 women. Some were in marriages similar to mine. Some had lost businesses to partners they had trusted. Some were simply women who had spent years being told their instincts and their competence didn't count for anything inside their own homes. I responded to every single one. 7 of them became the founding community of what is now a functioning NGO with 3 active programs: financial literacy workshops, legal referral support, and a documentation guidance service specifically designed for women navigating divorce, asset recovery, and financial abuse. We are not large. We are not funded by anyone famous. We operate on 180,000 rupees a month, raised through a combination of small donations, workshop fees, and one corporate partnership with a Lahore-based firm whose HR director attended our first public event and wrote us a check on the spot. We are, however, very precisely run. If this story resonated with you, if you recognized something in Nadia's silence, in her patience, in the way she kept going when the easier thing would have been to fall apart, tell me where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone who is in the middle of their own quiet storm right now, someone who is holding it together on the outside while figuring out their next move on the inside, share this with them. Not as advice, just as a reminder that they are not alone, and that the ending isn't written yet. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. New stories go up every week. Real, human, specific stories about people who found their footing when the ground disappeared beneath them. I'll see you in the next one.